The Godfather, one of the most iconic spectacles till this day, follows the Corleone crime family and their rise to the top of the mob world. Many know this film to be a fictional portrayal of the Mafia, including legendary characters like Michael and Vito Corleone. But what if I told you many of these characters and scenes were actually inspired by real-life mobsters and events? That's right. Even though the main premise of the movies were fictional, there is a splash of real-life events that were put into the film. Except instead of the film's characters, it was many of the founding fathers of organized crime who inspired the film. Now, you may not have known this till now, but there's actually many different scenes and characters based on these real mafiosos. Let's uncover the real-life story of the Godfather. Starting off with the Don himself, Vito Corleone. Vito was played by Marlon Brando and was based on a blend of real-life mobsters. These include mainly Joe Profaci and Frank Costello. Joe Profaci was a boss of the Colombo family who also had an olive oil importing company to hide his illegal activities. Profaci was dubbed the Olive Oil King and used this front to escape tax evasion charges. Moving along to Frank Costello. Like Vito, Frank Costello had many political connections and was shrewd and strategic, receiving the nickname the Prime Minister of the Mob. Similar to Vito, Costello was also against the narcotics trade, believing it to be more destructive in the long haul. Marlon Brando, who played Vito, also studied tapes of Frank Costello's voice in an effort to replicate real life. Vito Corleone's assassination attempt was inspired by mobster Frank Scalis's death. While buying fruit at a vegetable market, Scalis was gunned down by two hitmen. Michael was based on a mafioso named Bill Bonanno. Mob boss Joe Bonanno tried to deter his son away from the mob, similar to how Vito did to Michael. Joe didn't want his son Bill to enter the family business, and instead pushed him to get an education. Joe wanted his son to be a lawyer, sending him to law school. But just like the film, Bill found himself entering the family business. But instead of rising to become the successor of his father, Bill was more like Fredo in real life, relying on his family's wealth and being rather incompetent. The iconic scene between Michael and Virgil, the Turk Salozzo, is also based on a real-life event. In 1931, infamous mobsters Lucky Luciano and Joe the Boss Masseria sat down at a restaurant to play cards and indulge in cuisine. But when Lucky got up to go to the bathroom, Masseria was taken out by Luciano's hitmen. What Joe the Boss didn't know was Luciano secretly went behind his back, making a deal with his biggest enemy, Salvatore Maranzano. Michael's fleeing of the country is also similar to real-life stories of Lucky Luciano and mobster Vito Genovese. Vito Genovese fled New York after fearing he would be prosecuted for murder, returning after the charges were dropped. Lucky was deported to Italy after being in prison and ended up falling in love with a woman. These two real-life instances blend together to be akin to Michael's time in Sicily. Character Johnny Fontaine was based on famous singer and actor Frank Sinatra. It's well known that Sinatra had ties with the mob and at one point needed help from them as it seemed his career was slipping away. Like the movie, the mob aided Sinatra in escaping a contract he was in and shortly after was casted in a movie, helping revitalize his career. When Sinatra read the book and saw the film, he was not the biggest fan to say the least. It is even reported that Sinatra had a public dispute with the screenwriter Francis Coppola due to the eerie similarities between himself and Johnny Fontaine. Salvatore Tessio had many similarities to mobster Gaspar di Gregorio, who was one of Joe Bonanno's closest associates. After Joe Bonanno passed his power down to his son, Di Gregorio felt wronged, believing that he should have been the one to become the boss. Because of this, Gaspar led a 4-year revolt against Bill Bonanno, in which the media called it the Bonanno War. Similar to Tessio, Gaspar failed to take out his enemy. He tried setting up a peace meeting between him and Bill, and once Bill approached the house the meeting was held at, he was greeted with gunshots. He ended up surviving, and after a while the commission of the Mafia grew impatient with Di Gregorio's failures and outcasted him from being in a position of power. On the other hand, Tessio's treachery was met with him being whacked The Senate hearings involving Michael Corleone are based on real-life hearings called the Valachi hearings. U.S. Senator John McClellan investigated organized crime and its activities in 1963. The main mafioso involved was Joe Valachi, who became the first mobster to admit to the existence of La Cosa Nostra. Frankie Pentangeli's testimony during the trial was based on that of Joe Valachi. It's also important to note that in the 1950s there was what was called the Kefauver hearings, which also investigated organized crime. Prominent mobsters like Frank Costello and Vito Genovese were subject to speak in this hearing, but denied the existence of organized crime. Hyman Roth and Mo Green are two more characters who are based on real-life mobsters. Hyman Roth was based on Jewish gangster Meyer Lansky, and Green was based on Las Vegas tycoon Bugsy Siegel. I went into in-depth detail about their real-life counterparts in previous videos. Make sure to check those out if you haven't already. Their stories are quite interesting. Meyer Lansky really did travel to Havana to open up a casino, and after a while of it flourishing, the revolt began in Cuba. Meyer's casino was destroyed by rioters after President Batista was overthrown. Meyer, just like Hyman, tried to move to Israel in the latter part of his life, but was denied due to his ties with the Mafia. Instead of being taken out in the airport, Meyer ended up dying of lung cancer in real life. Bugsy Siegel was one of the first mobsters to open up a casino in Vegas, with the mob endorsing him. But after many months without profit and budgets increasing, the mob grew impatient with Siegel. Shortly after the commission discussed the Bugsy situation, he was gunned down in his girlfriend's house, and mobsters took over the Flamingo Casino. Just like the film portrayed, Bugsy was notorious for his short temper and his propensity for violence, being one of the hitmen for a crime group called Murder, Inc. It was also thought that he was skimming from the casino's earnings, especially his girlfriend. In The Godfather 2, the Havana meeting was also something that was based on real-life events. In 1946, the historic Havana Conference was held in the Hotel Nacional de Cuba, with a plethora of mobsters attending. Some of these include Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese, and many more. Like the film, the mobsters discussed business opportunities and the expansion into Cuba, the narcotics trade, and squandering any disputes between each other. One of the main disputes they discussed was about Bugsy Siegel and his failing casino. Many of these men wanted him gone, but Meyer Lansky defended him fiercely, and he was spared for the time being. But as you know, he was later taken out. As we just covered, there were many real-life similarities between many characters and events in the story. Author of the Godfather book, Mario Puzo, said that the characters were all fictional, but that had certain facets of real-life mobsters from his research. Though Mario Puzo never met any mobsters, he met a casino manager in Las Vegas who had ties to the mob. He absorbed numerous stories about the mob, which gave him inspiration to draw from. And when the book turned into the big screens, the fictional story, coupled with the hints of realism, formed a masterpiece. And that's the video. Thanks for tuning in. What real story did you enjoy the most? Comment below your thoughts about The Godfather's real-life ties to mob. Don't forget to like and subscribe.